Hey reader, welcome back here to the channel. This is Centaur here, and today we are looking at the dog mine teams for the Soviet Union in Bolt Action, comparing them to how they acted in second edition, how they run now in third edition. And I'm not gonna lie, I'm gonna start off by saying, first of all, if you're against animal cruelty, one, so am I. Two, this is gonna be a hard video. Okay, we're not gonna talk too much about it, but just suffice it to say, when you really, really want a war won, and you have to do whatever it takes in order to turn things around, sometimes, well, in all wars, there's going to be casualties, but in this case, unfortunately, some of those casualties are going to be the literal best of boys who are the best at following instructions. Okay. And we're going to be talking about that today as we head into Bolt Action. We're rounding out our anti-tank series. So as you probably noticed, we started out with things like the AT rifle team, which is pretty ubiquitous. You can get AT rifles with almost any nation in the game. Even though they were used by the United States, you still can't get them for the US, but basically everybody else can get them. Okay, there are a few other exceptions, but in general, most everybody gets those. And then from there, we worked our way into things like the shape charge weapons. We finished all of those up. And so now we're going into some of the more niche, unique, typically only one nation in the game gets access to these. And we're starting off today by looking at the Soviet dog mine teams. And so as we look at our overview and assessment, we're going to be looking at the same things that we always do. It's worth noting up front what exactly it is that we're talking about. So over here, you can see the Warlord Games miniatures over on the right-hand side. It's effectively, the concept is if you already have anti-tank mines that you've created, and these are magnetic mines, so that way they will trigger, they'll go up, that will push down on the pin effectively, and it will blow up the mine, right? Effectively. Highly effective in a minefield. Less effective if you think the enemy is going to take time to clear them out before they go through. And so, if you're looking for another way, especially in a crowded urban environment where you can easily utilize mines that have been working for a long time at this point, and are quite effective, but if you can make them deliverable in a way that's a little more reliable, like, say, with a dog, then that could be a more effective way to use the system. And that's exactly what happened, effectively. Okay. Yeah, just starting off with the fact if you're going to run these, I'm not saying you got to sell your soul. You don't have to scar your soul or anything else like that. But, do be aware, hey, it's a war game. War's war. Things happen. But things are about to happen to very, very good people. Okay. And so starting off as we look at range and rate of fire, in second edition, they had 18-inch range with one attack. You had roughly 2 to 4 shots, depending on how many guys you had in the, how many handlers you have in the squad, because each handler comes with one dog, and unsurprisingly, you have one mine per dog. So in that sense, it's kind of like a one-shot weapon, much like the Panzerfaust, which we talked about last week. But in this case, because the squad at least comes with 2 people, it's at least a 2-shot weapon, right? So to speak, because you have 2 dogs, assuming that you don't lose anybody on approach before you end up getting in there, right? And then in addition to that, instead of just rolling standard hit modifiers, standard damage modifiers, there's a chart that you consult. So also critical for kind of rightly understanding how this unit works. It's not just like a Panzerfaust in that sense, because Panzerfaust still have to follow all the standard rules regarding the game. They suffer -1 to hit for pins, moving. If you take them on an inexperienced unit, like say a Volkssturm unit or something like that, then all of those things are going to affect your Panzerfaust. Those things will not necessarily affect a dog mine team, right? And in third edition, they've basically seen no change, except that there have been quite a few changes, kind of. And it's possible that some things have changed and not, and that's where we're going to get to the discussion on the right-hand side. But before we do that, just a quick note about how this compares to other stuff we've looked at, right? So you have the Piat, which we talked about a little while ago, the projector infantry anti-tank weapon, which gets an extra 6 inches, well, it gets 6 inches less of range than the Dogmine team does. It only has 12 inches opposed to 18. The Dogmine team costs about 8 points less per mine, right? For the actual shooting stuff. 20 points is what you're paying for the Piat. Roughly 12 points for a 2-man team is what you're paying for the 2 dog anti-tank mines. But in exchange, the Piat, of course, can fire every single turn, right? They got the same penetration at pen +5. It isn't changing at all. So you're getting less shots with the dogs, but you can also stack the shots and fire them all off all at once if you really want to. And realistically, and this comes up extensively in arguments on Facebook and arguments on YouTube, how many shots is a Piat actually going to get realistically, right? Like you're probably not going to actually get 6 turns worth of shooting with a Piat. Both because how the heck you start in 12 inches away from an enemy unless they just decided to go Leroy Jenkins right into the middle of your army. And secondly, as a two-man team, often taken regular, but even if taken veteran, which is how I would personally recommend taking the Piats. In fact, I recommend just taking them with that and the guard subtype. That's what I would do. So pay 50 points even for a veteran Piat team. And I think that Piat team would actually do really good work for you. But critical here is realistically, a Piot's probably going to get off, what, maybe 2 shots, 3 shots or so. So you're actually pretty comparable to the number of shots that the dogs are getting. They're just getting better range for lower cost. And as we'll soon see, slightly higher effectiveness on average, right? Depending on how you use the Piat. The Piat really matters in terms of what range you're at and whether you have pins on you and stuff like that in terms of how it all works out. So in general, I think it's fair to say the Soviet Dogmine team is probably better bang for your buck, even though it's using one-shot weapons, than the Piat is. It's probably partially why some people don't like it. Similarly, if you compare it to the Panzerfaust, yes, you're getting pen -1. It's only pen +5 instead of a pen +6, so there's that. But you're getting that extra 6 inches of range, and for the weapon cost, you're only paying 12 points for the 2 shots, whereas you're paying 15 points for every single shot that you're getting, right? So you're even getting 2 of them at pen +5, shooting off on a 4+ all the time, is going to be better and cheaper than taking one Panzerfaust, which I think is also partially the reason why you tend to see people favoring Dogmine teams so much, is that if they're even used to using Panzerfaust in a Soviet army with captured Panzerfaust, you will probably see a number of people who are thinking to themselves, wait a minute, why am I spending so many points on Panzerfaust on top of the cost of a squad when I can just take some of these, okay? And so you'll see that. It also doesn't have the fixed rule, okay? Squad can advance and then fire, which is actually big because it means that 18-inch range is actually a 24-inch range once you factor in the advance move. And then that makes it equal to a bazooka, which costs almost twice as much. I mean, yeah, like you can buy a 3-man team easy. So you're getting 3 shots now, which let's be honest, is probably about the maximum number you're going to be able to fire with a bazooka effectively. And you're hitting on 4+ each time, which is probably better than a bazooka in general. And you got 3 bodies instead of 2, which is probably better than a bazooka. And you're cheaper than a bazooka with only 3 men. And you're not getting that -1 hit penalty with advance. So, again, it's a little more reliable. You always know you're going for the 4+, and you got to be careful on recce vehicles. We'll talk about that a little bit later. But just in general, yeah, I mean, I think in general, this is also why people tend to like it and why you don't see a lot of Soviet players complaining about not getting access to bazookas through Lend-Lease. Also because I think historically, I don't know that they did. I'm not sure. Somebody down in the comments, please let me know because I'm very curious now. But just suffice it to say, with the bazooka and then the even more expensive Panzerschreck, sure, the Panzerschreck's getting pen +1. You take a 4-man squad of Dogmine dudes that can fire all 4 in a single turn if you really need something deleted off the board for less points, if you can believe it, than a Panzerschreck of an equivalent veterancy, which is crazy, okay? But in addition, and this is the crazy thing, I don't think vehicles in 3rd edition get a cover save against the Dogmines. Now, first of all, this would keep it consistent with 2nd edition, because in 2nd edition, obviously, Dogmines ignored cover because cover was a hit modifier, and they didn't use hit modifiers, they used the chart, okay? Well, we have this FAQ errata that came out shortly after the release of the Army of the United States book. So it didn't have the Dogmine teams in place per se when it was talking about this. But it mentions, does the reinforced frontal armor rule work against attacks like Soviet AT dogs and IJA suicide teams? Okay, and this came out with the general rule. So obviously this would refer to just the general reinforced front armor rule. You do have some of those in the American books, the Stuart M5, the M5 Stuart, for example. But this would also apply to your French stuff and a bunch of other things like that. And the ruling says, no, the reinforced front armor rule does not work against either of these because it states shots, so it only applies against ranged attacks. Now, this is interesting because it kind of clarifies this clearly. Obviously, it means reinforced frontal armor doesn't work against either of these two things, right? So you're using your standard damage value. But it causes some other questions. Like, for example, okay, so if it's not a shot and it's not a ranged attack, then I guess things like cover saves, which you're also not typically getting in assault or close combat, I guess those would also not apply to either of these, which is fine. It's okay. I'm assuming that that's the way to read it. I'm a little surprised they didn't say, well, the Soviet AT dog's profile mentions in the chart that the dog is running underneath the tank. So it clearly wouldn't affect the front armor. I think it's actually quite clear. I think the intention is to keep things the same as it was in second edition. And in second edition, cover didn't really apply. And to be honest, getting a cover save against something that's going underneath of you would be pretty hard in the first place. So personally, I'm okay with it regarding the dog mine teams. It will be nice to see some clarification on how the various mechanics work with the dog mine teams, hopefully when the new book comes out within the next couple months is the plan. So from an opportunity cost perspective, what are we looking at? We're looking at an extremely cheap anti-tank weapon. Okay, let's just start here. I mean, we've already run through the math regarding, Piats and bazookas and Panzerfaust and Panzerschrecks. Like anything serious, it's really good, right? Because you're looking at 26 points in experience to take two guys. And remember, the inexperienced -1 penalty to shoot doesn't apply because one, it ain't a shooting attack. It's not a ranged attack, right? They've already said that. But in addition, because that's clarified in the FAQ regarding the reinforced frontal army. But in addition to that, you roll on a chart. And there's no evidence, it doesn't specify it in the chart, that inexperienced or pins or anything else like that affects the number that you roll. So you could take these inexperienced, and a lot of people at higher levels of competition did, at 26 points, which is still more expensive than an AT rifle, admittedly. But it makes it like number 3 in terms of level of cost, only surpassed by the IJA lunge mine guys, which is a single man drop with problems that we'll talk about in a future video soon and very soon. But just suffice it to say, like, it's so cheap. It's so cheap. I mean, even if you want to take it regular, you're only paying 36 points regular for two guys, right? And that's the size of most anti-tank teams, right? Most AT teams are 2 men. But in addition, and this is the crazy thing, after they fire the dogs off, unlike, for example, people who fire off Panzerfaust, hard baked into this cost are anti-tank grenades. Now, I don't think anti-tank grenades are particularly great, especially on 2 to 4 man squads, okay? And you can check out the AT grenades video in order to see more on why that is. Okay, suffice it to say, you are going to be dramatically more effective with AT grenades, especially if you got to get right up into base contact if you are a 6 to 10 man squad, okay? But even then, like, at least you have something, right, that you can use in order to attack stuff, and that's fantastic. So I think just on the whole, I think from a cost perspective, you still have a reason for taking AT rifles, which is mainly if you don't want stuff like really far forward, you're afraid you're going to face a lot of stuff on ambush, or a lot of stuff with machine guns that are just going to clear out small teams and stuff like that. It could be nice to have those further back. You just sit them in cover. They provide overwatch and support and protection against the unit. AT rifles will do a really good job for that, and they'll do good pin generation even if they don't do good removal. But if you're trying to do tank removal, I'm not going to lie, almost everybody in the war would want this profile. Almost every nation would love to have this profile, okay? There can be hidden costs to these, so obviously extra men and thus extra dogs and thus extra pen plus 5 shots is probably the most obvious expense, where you might be tempted to pay 52 points plus potentially subtypes once the book drops in order to take a 4-man inexperienced squad, because hey, it's still less than a bazooka and you're getting 4 shots with the same range effectively. And assuming the bazooka isn't moving and then shooting, it's the same range effectively. It's a 4+ to hit, which is probably about on par with a bazooka. It's the same penetration, but you can stack them if you want to. There's no rule that says you can only fire off one at a time. So toward that end, I think that's probably the most obvious extra hidden cost that you might see tied to the unit. You might also consider taking a transport for these. While I know the Bren carrier has kind of fallen on hard times in this edition because of the fact that there are other pretty cheap armored transports now, and the fact that it doesn't get double movement on roads means that there's a good reason to potentially consider things like an M3 half track or something like that if you're playing Soviets. But honestly, I mean, hardcore, if I'm looking at taking, especially a 4-man squad, you can fit a 4-man squad and an inexperienced officer in a Bren carrier. And you could even take that Bren carrier pretty cheap, 40, 50 points. You don't have to take extra weapons on it if you don't want to. I probably would, just because if you're going to keep the officer in there, then you might as well keep the officer in there. But that would run things up and get them in pretty cheap. It's a lot cheaper than buying things like an M3 White Scout car or an M3 half track. So, like that, that could be really effective, and it could help to make these a little easier. Honestly, you might even consider just taking something like a heavy fuel car, Sure, you got to keep it safe, but newsflash, you got to keep the dog safe too, right? So, like, you're already going to be prioritizing this thing. You're already going to be protecting it. So, hey, in for a penny, if you're only paying like 20 extra points in order to give that thing crazy mobility, and if you plan to just have an officer snap too, and then, both the transport and the dogs, and just rush the dogs out and throw stuff off, maybe it's okay if the transport's not particularly survivable. It might have done its job. You might remove a 200-point tank at the cost of a 50 some odd point anti-tank team, a 20-ish point heavy field car, and a 20-ish point inexperienced officer, right? Like, half the cost, right? It might do the job. So even though in general soft skin vehicles are a dangerous thing, and you really have to get pretty good at the game in order to make them work really effectively, just purely based on math, this might work. Okay? So there's that to consider. It also allows an extremely cheap unit to threaten armor with a very serious threat. So we talked about this in the Panzerfaust video. Half of its effectiveness is probably just its actual ability to remove, because a pen plus 5 will work really well against, tankettes and armored cars that are only damage value 7. It's going to work well against really light armor at damage value 8. If you fire enough of them, they can be pretty effective against damage value 9, right? Which means people have to be careful. Those are overwhelmingly the tanks you're going to see, right, in a match. Which means, yes, they can be effective, but the real actual power behind it is the knowledge that within a 24-inch radius of wherever they start the turn, those guys might rush out and attack your tank on a 4+ with nothing you can do to reduce the odds, right? Other than remove crew to reduce the number of shots. That's the only thing you can do about it, right? And so toward that end, there's a psychological game of like, I really need my tank up there in order to, to maintain control of this objective. I really need my tank up there in order to deal with his threat. I've got some really sweet, juicy targets over here. They're even right out in the open. But he's got those dog mines. Don't want to get hit by one of those. Don't want to eat one to the face. It's especially good against those recce guys where they're like, okay, I want to have like, my recce M3 Steward or my recce Panzer II, and I want these things to start just mowing down infantry. I want them to really root out the enemy. But then you're like, oh, but if I activate them earlier, then I can't recce away from the dogs, which is really nice, as we'll discuss later. So, do I activate them now? Do I activate them later? And it's this psychological game, which is also a critical aspect, in my opinion. It's actually the most important aspect behind the dogs. The dogs are actually most effective when you haven't fired them off yet, right? The moment you start firing off dogs, the more they begin to work out in the math in their head of like, oh, he's only got 2 dogs. He's got only about a 50-50 chance of hitting me, which means he's only on average going to get 1. And then he's got to roll for damage, and then he's actually got to roll in the damage chart probably, because he's probably not going to get a 6. Oh, hey, I think I might be okay, right? Like, this is the mindset. So ironically, the Dogmine team is quite effective just without having done anything for the entire game. Even if you never fire off a single one of them, they might have actually done their job by virtue of locking down and stunting enemy armor, which is really nice. So in terms of pin generation, are we taking this as a pin generating machine? First of all, in second edition, on average, you were getting about 1 to 2 pins per game, depending on whether you took 2 dogs, 3 dogs, or 4 dogs. Okay. I'm not going to include just small arms fire and stuff like that, because these guys do actually start with rifles. They become a rifle section effectively afterwards, admittedly a really tiny one afterwards. Unless you choose to give them submachine guns. You'll see some submachine guns over there on the right-hand side by Mardav Miniatures, which, by the way, Dewey Cat Productions has this miniatures. I didn't mention this on the last slide. I have printed these. They print really, really well. The actual man is a Warlord Games model, but the actual dogs are the prints by Dewey Cat. If you're not familiar with Dewey Cat Productions, you should go check them out on Wargaming 3D. Fantastic resources, a number of which are even free for you to download in case you want to just give it a try, but totally throw the team over there some love and buy some stuff from them as well, because prints are great. I never have a complaint whenever I buy those. Mardav Miniatures, I have not purchased any of these. That being said, I've seen a lot of people purchase these, and they are fantastic. from the look of it. They do look really, really great. So do highly recommend. Go ahead and take a look at them. I don't think Mardav is on Wargaming 3D because I think they sell physical prints instead of files. And I'm a printing guy. That's part of the reason why I haven't bought any of them yet. But you can find them on mdminis.co.uk. If you even just type in Mardav miniatures dog mine teams, it'll be the first hit that comes up on your search engine. So go ahead and take a look at those. But you know, when you're only paying 36 points regular for 2 shots, Minley is going to be on the lower end of this. You know, you're looking at about 18 to 36 points per pin, which is low by comparison to some of the more recent shape charge ones that we've seen. But it's not horrible. You know, it's not as good as an AT rifle. It's not as good as a light autocannon, sure. But it's not horrible. In 3rd edition, the hit difficulty has not changed. The unit structure has not changed. So it's the same rough number of pins per game that you're firing off. And it's the same cost as it was last edition. So it has not changed there either. Which means, in general, this is a pretty reliable unit. I don't think it's necessarily a good pin generator. That's not really why you're using these. Because, again, you're expending one-shot equipment, right? And there are very good reasons to only take, like, 2 shots, right, in a given squad. So there's that. But in general, you have great range. 24 inches is a perfectly excellent range for an anti-tank infantry section. It's a reliable hit chance. 4+, regardless of what happens to you, is fantastic by bolt action standards. Sure, you don't get any benefits for like point blank range or anything like that. So you can't get it any lower than a 4+ to hit. But hey, in my opinion, always knowing I have a 4+ to hit, it makes it reliable, which might actually be better than being good in some respects, right? It has really good penetration. +5 is an exceptional pen value. And as far as I can tell, no cover save against it, which means you might stand to do better than a bazooka or a Panzerschreck. When looking at damage, the chart is super easy for 2 reasons. Number 1, because you're always hitting on a 4, right? So there's that. We don't have to worry about whether you're on 3+ or 5+ or something else like that, you know, based on various things. But in addition, there won't be any values for damage value 5 or damage value 4 because we don't have any DV4 or DV5 vehicles. And the rules for the dog mine specify you have to target a vehicle. So they won't run under an infantryman and set off the mine. They're not going to do that. You do obviously get rifles and the option for submachine guns, as we'll discuss later when we talk about objective taking and objective control, which is an interesting option. It does increase the cost, but it is an interesting option for you to be able to set up your boys with. But in general, as you see there, the math is fine, right? It's not horrible. Obviously, against things that are damage value 8, damage value 7, damage value 6, the odds are really good, right? I mean, you have a roughly 1 in 6 chance you're going to be rolling on the damage chart just by picking up the dice and saying, I'm attacking this unit, right? And thing to keep in mind, the moment that you pick up multiple dice, because you're going to fire off multiple dogs in the same turn, take each of these numbers and multiply them by 2. Your chances go up quite a bit. And this is the reason why chances of even hitting damage value 9 vehicles, if you have enough dogs and you're willing to go all in on a single roll, is actually not hard to do, right? I mean, even if you're sitting on just 3 dogs and choose to fire them off, it's a roughly 1 in 3 chance that you're going to be able to roll in the damage chart against a damage value 9 vehicle. If you have 4, it's about a 50-50 chance that you're going to be getting to roll something against it. And that is not bad at all, especially if it only costs you like 50 to 60, 50, 70 points in order to take. It's not bad at all. And obviously, you know, that sweet spot is going to be DV6 and DV3, right? Admittedly, like on the one hand, if you're going after like a damage value 3+ toe or a Tashanka or something like that, basically horse-drawn whatevers, on the one hand, those aren't very many points. On the other hand, the dog didn't cost you many points either, right? And it's not like you lose the handler too. You're just losing the dog. So it's only about 12 points worth of value, which means suddenly even a horse-drawn limber or a mule team doesn't look that bad in terms of value, right? If you're removing an order dice and somewhere between roughly, you know, 4 to 8 points, 4 to 12 points worth of value, like it's not horrible, actually. You know, when you factor in the order dice, it's not bad at all. So on the whole, damage potential, really good, actually, off of these things. And so now when we get to objective holding, this is where things get interesting. So, you know, it's 2 to 4 men, which is not great. With cover, which is nice. You know, it's relatively easy to get advantage on cover because you're so small, right? You know, you can fit almost anywhere. You can pretty easily block line of sight to yourself, which is nice. And you can take them at any inexperience level. Obviously, veterans will in general be better for objective holding. I don't think they're actually the better choice for using dog mines, mostly just because of the cost, right? Like 2 veterans with dog mines are almost the same cost as 4 inexperienced guys with dog mines, which is kind of crazy too, as regards just how the whole scaling thing works. I don't personally know that I like how that works, but that is neither here nor there. The important thing is they are going to be generally more durable than other AT teams because most anti-tank teams of some kind are only 2-man teams, right? And so because and in some cases 1-man teams, as we will see when we get to Japan. So toward that end, like they are actually more durable as objective holders. I'd probably still rely on infantry squads. I'd probably still rely on artillery before I end up relying on these guys. But in general, like they're not horrible, especially for the cost, right? They're also a reasonable anti-personnel option when you're not tank hunting. So if you've got infantry that are pushing up on an objective, unlike the Piat, the bazooka, the Panzerschreck, or even the AT rifle, which you're rolling 1 dice to hit, you might wound 1 guy. Maybe there's a cover save. You've got rifles or submachine guns on every single one of these people. So at least, even if it's only rifles and you're getting 1 shot per person, you are getting 1 shot per person, which is not horrible. And chances to hit, chances to wound, admittedly, there's going to be cover saves, whatever, it's fine. But hey, your ceiling is higher than what it was before, because your ceiling before was 1, unless the shape charge is hitting a building and destroying men, in which case it's obviously going to be slightly higher than that, potentially, right? Your ceiling is going to be higher. It's going to be maximum of 6. But in general, that is really attractive, right? Especially if you don't think you're going to get seriously pushed on an objective, especially if you've already fired off the dogs, just being able to keep a 2 to 4-man squad just hanging out, go down every single turn, right? Jump into a ruin and go down every single turn. 2+ cover save is going to be hard to remove. And if they want to try ranging it on you, that's fine. However long it takes, it's probably worth the points to you that thing was only firing at your now expended dog mine team than anything else. It's probably worth it. It also obviously does reasonable damage versus armor, especially light armor. If you have light armored vehicles, damage rate 8 or lower that's coming at you, these guys will do reasonable damage against them, mostly because, again, you can fire more than 1 time per turn, so there's less chance of being a little more swingy, and there's nothing they can do about your hit chance, which is really nice. You have the ability to reactive fire if assaulted as well, and this is with, multiple rifle or SMG shots. That is extremely rare on a squad like this. So the fact that you're even getting more than 1 shot puts you in a very small group of people, like literally a squad with Panzerfaust, I think is the only thing that can get close to that in terms of volume. And I mean, yeah, the only real drawbacks behind this is that it's fragile, because you're probably taking them regular inexperienced in order to save points. You might be tempted to take them only 2, maybe even 3 dudes. So it is a relatively fragile unit. It is a high priority target. You will see people, if they have armor and they've invested in armor, they'll be like, okay, well, I got to get rid of the dogmine teams. Those guys have to go first, right? The other potential drawback behind these guys, of course, is that they can hurt your own vehicle. So, there's a whole strategy that involves, your anti-tank teams helping to kind of accompany your other armor. So that way, they're putting at least pins, if not actual pain down on enemy vehicles, and then your armor can potentially duel with and take out the enemy vehicles. You just gotta be really careful, because if you're within 18 inches of these dogs and any of the dogs rolls a 1, the dog is going to scamper under your vehicle instead and try to blow you up. Right. So it's tricky. I suspect that there's a strategy. I'll leave it to the veteran Soviet players, because I've tried these guys a couple times. They were fine. Admittedly, one time I was playing against a partisan army and they didn't have any vehicles. So I don't really consider that a good test for dog mines. So I've only really played with them once. I played against them once in a tournament setting. And I was able to kind of catch them and run them over with Polish cavalry before they were able to get to my armored vehicles, because I kind of kept the vehicles back. But yeah, like, just suffice it to say, like, I'm sure there's a strategy on how you use them and position them so that way you're not really threatening your own vehicles. But that 18-inch range around your unit, it is a two-edged sword. It can potentially cut you. You're 3 times more likely that they're going to go under an enemy vehicle than under your own. So personally, I wouldn't worry about it too much, but it is technically a thing that's there. So be aware of it. When you look at objective taking potential, it is a very small squad, right? It caps out at 4 people. That is not particularly great for taking objectives. However, a 4-man squad that does 8 shots with no -1 to move penalty, because the submachine gun has the assault keyword, a decent chance of being at point blank range if you're actually shooting, and thus probably hitting on something like 2s or 3s, maybe 4s if you're inexperienced. I mean, that ain't bad at all, right? I mean, that's good volume. That's roughly on average about 2 wounds against a regular squad. That's a wound past a 4+ cover save. That is not horrible, right? And for as cheap as you can relatively get these things, it's not bad. Admittedly, again, you're paying like, you know, what is that, 44 to 88 points in order to take a regular squad that way. It'd be slightly cheaper if you were taking them inexperienced. But still pretty close to 80. So, like it's expensive. I'm not trying to say that this is a cheap SMG option unless you should always go with SMGs. I'm just saying if you really think, hey, I'm going to need these guys to help me take objectives because maybe I went really scant on my rifle platoon because I wanted to invest in armor, and so I need infantry that can actually take and hold objectives. Just keep in mind, SMGs are a potential option. It also, again, has solid penetration versus armor. So people are using the whole, they claim an objective with an infantry squad and then they move an armored vehicle onto and around that objective. So you got to remove the armor in order to actually reclaim it and take it for yourself. These guys can help you remove that armor, and relatively effectively. One of the most effective ways to do it probably in the game. You have your rifles with submachine guns to help you clear infantry. So, if they're just trying to hold something with infantry, you can just go the straight shoot them out route. You also technically get tough fighters on the squad if you're using the submachine guns. So could become a reasonable assault unit, maybe, if you start whittling something down, but you can't get the last two guys or something like that out of cover. This could be a relatively fast and relatively painless way to do it. But again, this is the issue, right? It's a small squad. So you really want to accompany these with something else or multiple somethings else in order to make sure that they're effective. But hey, if in a pinch, if you need to do it, they're not the worst. And they're definitely better than most anti-tank options in the game. So in terms of target prioritization, what do you want? You want lightly and medium armored vehicles. Damage value 7 to damage value 9. And the simple reason for this is your cheapest damage value 7 vehicles are going to be about 55 to 60 points. And that's getting like an open top damage value 7 plus machine gun. Okay, they're super cheap, right? You do have, your Renault FTs obviously as, the bottom end, the weird edge of the bell curve, right? But in general, damage value 7 is going to be somewhere between 50 and 95 points, more or less. Damage value 8 is going to be somewhere between 80, depending on the armament, because some of those, low velocity AT sort of things, or double machine guns, it's just like two machine guns on it sort of things, can get closer to like 80. But you might end up seeing some stuff as high as like 135, 140, sometimes maybe even 150. In any of these situations, taking out one light armored vehicle that's 150 points is equivalent to taking two regular 4-man squads of these with points left over, right? No submachine guns, obviously. But like that's great value, right? Because the chances that one of those squads with their 4 dogs is going to take out that armor is pretty high. Everything else you get from that second squad is just gravy. Anything else you get from that remaining squad for the rest of the match is just gravy, right? They've already taken care of themselves. So that's the sweet spot. Obviously, damage value 9, if you can sucker punch one of those are routinely 175 to 250 points, which is fantastic. So highly recommend. It's worth taking a look at. Soft skin transports and tows are also really great, mostly because of the fact that one, you have the dog mines, which is a very effective way of clearing them because all you need is one thing hitting on 4s, and then you just got to not roll a 1. Just got to be 2s, right? And so 2 dogs on their own. You got the transport. If there are guys inside, that's just extra. That's just the beautiful sprinkles on top to help take care of everything. Toes, obviously, as we mentioned earlier, not necessarily great for a points removal perspective. Is good for, hey, I threw away 12 points worth of dog mine and I got me an order dice. Even if that order dice was only 4 points inexperienced as a mule, right? It's still an order dice, right? A point in order dice is an order dice is an order dice, right? So it doesn't matter whether they bought a Churchill or a mule. So toward that end, pretty reasonable. Okay. Small infantry teams you can do decent work against, mostly because again, you do have rifles, which is nice. You could have submachine guns, which would also be really nice. Your cost goes up a lot if you put submachine guns on everybody. So, whatever. You can do what you want. And if you really don't have anything else better to do, you can go after heavily armored vehicles. I don't know how effective you're actually going to be against those because you're looking at like 3s to, 5+ to wound in order to break a damage value 10. You need a perfect 6 in order to roll on the chart against damage value 11. And then you're only glancing against those. So like, I don't think it works against those, but hey, could be good. So what are the changes I would make? Well, obviously we can change the chart. Well, we're going to talk about changes to the chart. I think the cleanest way to do it that changes the least. So there's no changes to chart. There's no changes to any of the rulings that have currently been made. Is we just increase the cost for the mines to 10 points per dog instead of what they currently are. Because currently it's 4 points per dog at inexperienced, 6 points per dog at regular, and 8 points per dog to veteran. And if you were to do the change, what that would mean is your baseline starting cost would be 38.44.50. And then you would double that effectively to, what is that, 76, 88, 100 if you were to get up to a 4-man squad. Now, I already can see the Soviet players telling me, well, at that point, it ain't worth it. I'm just going to take 3 AT rifles for the same cost as one 4-man dog mine team. Hey, that might be a thing you might consider doing. You got to maintain firing lanes for all of those AT rifles. I like AT rifles, so I don't personally have a problem being the guy on record who said, hey, maybe we should make it so Soviets are running more AT rifles. I don't have a problem with that at all. So, again, I think this works out fine. The primary reason why I landed on 10 points each is that means that a 2-man dog handling team at 44 points is 4 points more when taken regular than a regular Piat team. They're paying the same number of points per man, the same number of points for their multi-shot, let's say for the Piat versus the dogs, right? It's 20 points for the Piat, 20 points for the dogs. And the big difference is you're probably going to get maybe 2 shots off with the Piat. You're going to get 2 shots off with the dogs. And I think that's maybe a worthwhile trade. And so now at least the Piat team, if they get off a 3rd shot, that's helping to make up for the anti-tank grenades that the other 2-man team has. And I feel like that's relatively fair. So personally, I think that's where I would place it in terms of the math if I had to adjust it. I do think it's primarily a cost issue. The rules are fine. They are aggressive. They encourage you to play a certain way. They invite potential threat against your own forces, and they could potentially ruin your entire day because you went for a lot of dog mines, okay? But at the same time, you might find that the actual problem is with the chart, okay? I'm not necessarily in the mind that we need to jump it up to a 5+ difficulty to hit, because at a 5+ difficulty to hit, I think what we would find is that people would be like, well, now in order to even get 1 hit off, I need to take 3 dogs. And if I'm capped at 4 dogs, I can't realistically get 2 chances to wound, at which point it isn't worth it. And so people stop taking it. Okay. It's going to go the same way as the Goliath mine. What I think might be a more effective way of doing this instead is to make it so that on a 4+, it hits the target. On a 3, the dog runs away. And on a 1 or a 2, it runs under one of your own. I think that's also really dangerous. And I think people would look at it and say, oh man, a 33% chance. I don't think that works. Okay. There's a 3rd way. And I think this might work better. You guys tell me if you think I'm wrong. Okay. The other simple change, and it's a relatively easy change to make this work, is that we make it so that inexperienced dog mine teams suffer a -1 to the roll. And what that would effectively give you is it would give you your 5+ chance to hit, and your dog runs under your own vehicle on a 1 or a 2 with an inexperienced team, but you don't get commensurate penalties with a regular or veteran team. Now, I'm not in favor of giving it the chaplain treatment and adding a +1 to the results on the chart for veterans. Although if you were to move it to say like a 5+ is a hit, a 4 through, 2 through 4 is it runs away, runs off on its own, and a 1 is it runs under your own vehicle. If that was the case, we could give it the chaplain treatment and say, hey, maybe inexperience doesn't apply in a -1 because again, going to a 6+ to hit is just brutal. It would just antiquate it. But a 4+ only on veterans, well, that would give you a good reason to pay the increase, the increased cost for veterans. And then at that point, you just don't do an increased cost for the unit. You just keep them at the price they are. But I do think something needs to change. You could change the chart. Again, I hate changing charts. It's so messy. And the charts have been reproduced in so many places. I don't really want to change the chart if we can avoid it. Although, hey, if the new book comes out and the chart has changed, fantastic. I don't care. That's great. Okay. But I think that would be, I think I would probably lean toward maybe the inexperience penalty applies. Just add 1 little word to the text of the dog mine team rule, and then maybe you're fine. That could also work. But hey, like these are all things that I'm workshopping. We'll see what I end up eventually putting into the Zern mission pack if I feel like it's necessary for us to adjust things. I'd personally prefer not to do points adjustments in general for some things. For some things like artillery, we just kind of had to because there just wasn't much else that we could do about it. So, my artillery series, a lot of it just came down to at this points cost, there's a reason why we don't see them much. For dog mines, I do wonder if it could be something as simple as a small rule adjustment or something like that. Only because then people can still use Easy Army in order to build things out. They don't have to worry about stuff. The poor team, Greg over there at Easy Army, doesn't have to create a whole new line of things to reflect, everybody's points adjustments and stuff like that. That's just too much work to demand of them. So, I think things like that could be effective. Let me know what you think down below, and we'll go from there. What I do think is if we were to make changes to the dog mine team, I think we would see very clear roles for each of the anti-tank options in the Soviet list, which is what I personally like. I don't care whether something is the best or the worst. I care about, is there a reason to take all of them? And so if you just want cheap long-range support, if you're primarily looking at pin generation, AT rifle, go for it. And easy to make because the AT rifle is on the sprue, right? If you want high explosive blast potential and you want to be able to spam HE and you want to run a serious leaf blower list, you do have the Empalmet launcher, which you can 3D print for relatively cheap online, which is great. And then add those onto, just a couple of guys who are lying down on the ground or whatever. Because, we always have those bodies just kind of lying around. What are we going to do with them? And then if you want a really expensive, like actual armor breaker, that's going to go out and actually do some breakage against them, then you've got your dog mine team, right? And that could be highly effective for helping to actually remove armor. But I think some sort of tiny adjustment would help to make sure that we've got this interesting trifecta. We'd see an interesting blend. We might even see people who are taking heavy weapons platoons take one set of each, because they're like, well, I want to cover different bases. I want to do different things. And so because of that, I want to take all the different AT options. And that is something, as far as I know, has never happened in competitive play. There's always been somebody, typically the Empalmet launcher, who sits it out in the back. And we're going to talk about the Empalmet launcher in a future video. But just suffice it to say, there are reasons why it sits at the back. But just suffice it to say for now, I'm still kind of on the fence, mostly because, again, I haven't played with them very often. So if you are a solid, have played a lot of games, Soviet player, please do let me know down below what you think, because I'm sure a lot of people would have interesting thoughts. Would making it so that the inexperienced -1 penalty applies, would that make it a deal breaker? Would a, 38, 44, 50, and then, what is that? 19, 22, 25 for every additional man on top of that. Does that price point just get to the point where you might as well not take an AT team and you might as well just take an armored vehicle? Let us know down in the comments below, and I will see you next time.